Hello, my name is Ashley Verdugo, and the sexual variation that I will be focusing on is recreational sex, and the science theory that I will be touching on is conflict theory. So, I will be focusing on the gender discrimination of it all with the conflict theory. So, recreational sex is when one wants to be sexually active and not have any commitments whatsoever with whoever they choose to do it with. This may be wanting to explore your sexual experience. It is more so for like your pleasure than to want anything serious. So, according to Judith Lorber in The Social Construction of Gender, she states that gender is a social institution that is deeply rooted in and permeates all the major social structures and institutions of society. Gender inequality is produced and maintained through social processes that benefit men at the expense of women. So, recreational sex ties into conflict theory with gender by highlighting how sexual norm, expectations, and double standards often reinforce patriarchal power structures and gender inequality. Now, for the historical view of the sexual variation of recreational sex, I will be focusing on the time period of the 1960s. So at this time, recreational sex was very stigmatized, especially for women. If you were not married and having sex, it was very frowned upon. And of course, there was double standards with this for men and women. Although it was frowned upon for all, it was more so frowned upon for women, and there was that double standards, and men were excused very often. Some people would even admire men for it, and for women on the other hand, they would get called names like loose, or that they weren't ladylike, that ladies wouldn't do things like that. And as for same-sex individuals, they were usually criminalized, and if they were caught having sexual relations, cops would even go as far as to raid bars, clubs to see if they could arrest someone or publicly shame them. Now, Catholicism saw recreational sex at this time as morally wrong and sinful. Sex is only for procreation and a marriage to the Catholic religion. Being a virgin and pure at this time period was highly valued, which is very true to this day as well, but it was more so for women. In 1968, Pope Paul even stated that artificial birth control was not morally okay in the religion, as well as recreational sex. With that being said, women were slowly starting to challenge the church and their beliefs. They did this with, getting birth control and opening up sexually. Conflict theory doesn't necessarily accept/lack acceptance for the sexual variation for this time period. It focuses more on how power, inequality, and control operate off around sexuality, including, recreational sex. According to Randall Collins in A Conflict Theory of Sexual Stratification, conflict theory sees the condemnation of recreational sex in the 60s, especially for women, as a tool used by the dominant groups, which is men, religious institutions, conservative social structures to maintain power and control. Today, the informal, cultural, and social acceptance of recreational sex is much higher than in the past decades, but it also still isn't 100% accepted by everyone. It varies by gender, culture, religion, and age group. Although casual sex has been more accepted, considered that there are considering that there are now dating apps to do just that. Many women advocate for casual sex to not be shamed by others. It has been more accepted, but there is still that double standard for men and women. It's okay for men to, sleep with 20 girls, but if a woman wants to do that, she's considered easy. And the LGBT community has also been more accepted in their sexual freedom nowadays. According to the media, depictions of sexual attitudes by Karen Ayo states that the mere presence of certain topics in the content, casual sexual encounters, might convey an attitude about the behavior's importance and relevance to people's lives. At times, such inclusive depictions can empower audience members. It is way more open and diverse than it's ever been. For example, there's even a show called Sex Education that shows real life experiences of what teens may go through, and it focuses on consent, communication on the topic, and self-exploration. Portraying consent and the importance of it has been a huge topic in the media. You know, conflict theory now and in the 60s is honestly pretty similar. It explains the acceptance or lack of acceptance of casual sex today as a reflection of ongoing power struggles between social groups. Pretty much the same as before. It's the same with gender, class, sexuality, religion. It sees sexual norms not as neutral or natural, but as tools used by dominant groups, again, to maintain that control. To conclude, the conflict theory offers a useful lens for understanding how casual sex has been viewed and treated across historical and contemporary contexts. Essentially, it explains the struggles over power, control, and dominance that influence the acceptance or rejection of casual sex. Often tied again, with gender, class, sexuality, social institutions, and when referring to the dominance, it is referred to, patriarchy and religious institutions which try to control sexual behaviors, more specifically within women. In my opinion, I believe that the acceptance with recreational sex will continue, as time goes on, whether that be 5 years from now, 100 years from now, it has became more normalized. It has evolved a lot since the past. I feel like as we keep going forward, that will continue. But of course, it does depend on your moral beliefs, your religion, culture, whatever you may believe.